Final exam 2 weeks from today in class right here. Yeah. Speaking of which, next semester, Poli-Sci 179 will be back as always Wednesday, 4 o'clock, right here in this auditorium. And there are still about 600 seats open, so hurry. Okay? Grab those seats before they're gone. In addition, I will be teaching law up in the business school, BizAd 175, and that's open to all students, not just business majors. And I'm teaching business ethics, BizAd 107. So sign up for all three and you can have an Alan Ross semester. How fun is that? Speaking of fun, we are in for an incredible hour. We have with us once again, he's come every year for the last about 6 years. I'm so honored to have Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom is back today. He is the star of 179 every semester that he has been here, except this time he's the opening act. Because next week we have with us, who is it? Someone you've met. Your wife is coming next week. Jennifer Siebel Newsom will be here next week. Director of Misrepresentation. So next week, very happy to have with us. This being activism, we did not have any politicians up till now, and this is the only one I invited for this semester because, unlike most politicians, Gavin Newsom is a leader out in front on issues and not following the crowd. He has a history of that. When he was, by the way, this is his second term as lieutenant governor. Prior to that, he was mayor of San Francisco for 2 terms. As mayor, he pushed for citywide Wi-Fi when no one was talking about that. We just passed in Berkeley the soda tax. He mentioned that many years ago when people thought it was a crazy idea. Care not cash, homeless policy. This is a great idea that he had. Universal health care in San Francisco. Most recently, he is the only statewide politician to come out for something called legalization of marijuana. No one else has had that up front. And on the 12th day of being mayor of San Francisco, when no one was talking about it, he legalized same-sex marriage. He has already announced he is running for governor a few years from now. So welcome the next governor of California, Gavin Newsom.
Thank you, buddy. All right. Now, this is the damn 6th time I've been here, so I'm running out of material. But the good news is not many of you were here 6 years ago. Were you? All right, I'm just worried. I know these graduation rates now are getting a little slower and a little longer. So, I got to check in material. But I thought I'd do something a little bit differently, and I mean this. I've done this, I think, once, and it was not a disaster, but an effort to try new things and learn from my mistakes. I thought it'd be a little more interesting in advance to hear from you. Not a Q&A, but begin by getting a sense in the room what's on your mind. So if I could just see a few people randomly show a few hands, any damn topic. You came here and all that you care about in life is, child care, or foster care. Or you were here and it's all about prison reform. You want to talk about Prop 47. You're concerned about the high-speed rail. You're furious, that there's these religious exemptions now in Indiana and Arkansas and Georgia, or you are vehemently opposed to same-sex marriage and you believe in traditional marriage and you want some answers. You're curious what we're doing on that legalization initiative, which is just a few months away from getting out on the streets and knocking you up in front of the movie theater asking for your signature. What's on your mind? I'm curious. Anyone? What do you think we should? What do you want to talk about? Oh, see, I made a mistake already. All right, industrial ag. I like it. What else? Tuition. He's for more tuition increases. How about you? Oh, sorry. Wrong audience. That's the UC Regents I was talking to. We'll get to that. What do you have? Immigration reform, Mr. Rubio. How about you? Mass incarceration, prison reform, perfect segue from 47, 3 strikes, Prop 36, and legalization of marijuana. You. Yeah, 50. Oh, look at that. You guys are into that. I like that. Have you been the first mayor in the United States to increase the minimum wage? I'm happy to take that. Anyone else? How about over here? How about you? Yes. Campaign finance. I'll just call it reform because God help us, the financing as it stands now ain't working. Who else? Not a chance. All right. Yeah, it is my favorite TV show, Veep, and I am good at being number 2. As lieutenant governor, but I did appreciate former Mayor Willie Brown's column. But I'm not gonna talk about that. But then again, who knows how it goes? Anyone else? Ooh, this is like we're back in the '60s now at Berkeley. All right, that's cool. I mean, fair is fair. Why limit the conversation to marijuana? Anyone else? Good. So, there's a lot of things going on with the death penalty in California. Or, depending on your point of view, nothing's going on with the death penalty in California. So we could talk about that. And then 2 more, because we only got 45 minutes. Perfect. So we'll connect that dot with the first one. Oh, like that. Like that. Well, let's start there. Let's go back to 50 A.D., Anyone around then? Maybe the guy who's for legalizing the LSD is. He may remember. There was a guy named Plutarch. Remember him? Some of you may, it's a fancy crowd, so I expect you know who Plutarch is. I go to Stanford, they're not convinced. That's not fair. My wife was a graduate from Stanford. Be nice to her next week. Plutarch had a wonderful quote about 50 A.D. I'm exaggerating a little bit. He was born in 40 A.D., died around 100, 105 A.D. So somewhere in between, he said the following. He said, the imbalance between the rich and the poor is the oldest and most oldest and most devastating ailment of all republics. Think about that. Around 50 A.D., close to 2,000 years ago, here's an historian warning the Greeks of the oldest and most damaging ailment of all republics is the imbalance between the rich and the poor. Fast forward 2,000 years later, and here we are, and you asked me a question about income inequality that Alan Kruger probably described better than anyone else as the Great Gatsby curve, the growing concentration of the haves and have-nots. Let's think about it in the context of California. A lot of us talk about living in 2 Californias, a coastal California and an inland California. They came out with the newest unemployment numbers just a week ago. San Mateo County is the lowest unemployment in the state of California, 3.5%. Colusa County, unemployment in non-seasonally adjusted unemployment number was 22.7%. So when we talk about living in 2 different worlds in the same state, that's just one symbolic and substantive example. Just shy of 25% of people in the state of California are living below the poverty line. We have more people living below the poverty line in this state than any other state in the nation, and we have more billionaires, not surprisingly. So it's manifested here probably as acutely as any other part of the country. And then you can look within cities. Look at San Francisco, the tip of the spear, this friction and frustration, those folks protesting the Google buses, the Genentech buses, the haves and the have-nots. Someone said it's not just about going to Eastern California, it's about going to East Oakland. It's about addressing the concerns in East LA or East Palo Alto. The income inequality we see manifest literally within our own cities, let alone regions, or obviously across this state. I would argue there's fundamentally no greater challenge in our lifetime outside of the external challenges of climate change and the world we're living in that context. And so it requires a lot of imagination, and I think it requires a little bit more imagination than candidly we've been advancing. Let me tell you why. When I was mayor of San Francisco, and I appreciate Alan bringing this up, we're the first city in the United States to do universal health care, regardless of pre-existing conditions, regardless of your ability to pay, and regardless of your immigration status, which is interesting. There's not a health care plan in the country that's universal for people that are undocumented. San Francisco is an exception. We advanced to the issue of the $15 minimum wage. We advanced at the time the highest minimum wage in the United States. A little over $10.47 now. Seattle beat us to the punch by advancing a proposal that doesn't go into effect, but over a few years to 15. San Francisco quickly doubled down and will be ahead of them in actually going forward at $15. We're the only paid sick leave in the United States. America, universal preschool, been there, done that. President talks about it, we did it. I can give you a litany of other things we've done, but let me go back to what I just said. It hasn't necessarily moved the needle on income inequality. It hasn't substantially addressed the friction that's manifest in the streets of San Francisco. So it begs the question, all those things are absolutely, from my humble perspective, necessary, but by definition, not sufficient to address it. So the question is, what is? And this is a question everybody's asking, and few folks are answering different ways, but are struggling to answer it in the right way. And I don't want to belabor the point. I want to get back to some of my ideas on it, because I want to include and incorporate some of your ideas. But I want you to think, until we get back to it, about what I just said. Just raising the minimum wage is not going to necessarily solve it. It's going to help a lot of people, and it's absolutely essential. Providing those support services and early child education is critical, but it's not necessarily going to solve it. There's something else happening here. And it's not just at peril at UC Berkeley to stand here where Robert and everyone else stand giving lectures. It's not just, from my humble perspective, the hyper-financialization of the economy. It's not just tax policy. I think something else is going on, because you're seeing raging and growing income inequality around the rest of the world. Something else is happening. And I will just leave this consideration. The merger of IT and globalization are playing a huge part of this. More IT, more globalization, more IT. Technology is also driving this income inequality in a profound and significant way. And so I want to talk about that at peril we don't get to all of your other issues. We talk about water. Can't talk about California without talking about water. 4th year of a drought. And boy, my friends in the almond industry aren't too happy. Takes a gallon of water for every almond. People are saying, well, then stop growing almonds. Other folks say, no. The real problem is animal agriculture. You talk about industrial agriculture. Well, let's talk about animal agriculture. How many of you love having a burger? Man, you can't be an environmentalist. You obviously don't care about the water crisis, do you? I read the other day, it's over 100 gallons for every ounce of beef. I don't know. I eat some pretty big burgers. Average burger, folks are saying over 660 gallons per hamburger. It's just interesting. Folks say the real culprit's watermelons. They're even consuming, I know. None of you are pretty happy about that, but tough stuff. So we're in this crisis where 80% of our water consumed in the state of California is for agricultural use, 20% for urban users, commercial and the like. And what did the governor do? He decided to slap on restrictions, which I, by the way, supported, but only on urban users, residential users, some commercial users, not on big ag. His argument, well, big ag's not getting their water distributions from the federal water project. It's called the Central Valley Water Project. And they're only getting about 20%, potentially less, from the state water project. So what is big ag doing? They're putting a lot of straws in the ground. And at last count, we estimate there are 100,000 straws that have been put in the ground, groundwater. And we've got some wells that have to be that are being now dug as much as 1,500. I read the other day about a well that was close to 2,000 feet deep. And they were saying they're pulling water out in California that dropped before the pyramids were built. And it's so alkaline, it's got so many mineral salts, that the cost of processing and energy use just to process, to clean the water, makes it almost cost prohibitive, because we're drilling down so far in the aqueduct to make up for these water restrictions. This is a serious issue in California. And I want to get back to it as well, because we're just going to talk about the problems and then we're going to get back to solutions. Hold me accountable for this. But this is the biggest issue, I would argue, outside, again, of income inequality. It connects the dot to that other big issue I talked about, energy and climate change, because I think there's definitely a correlation. Issue of tuition. Well, we've only doubled your tuition since 2007. Could be worse. Wait. It's about to get worse. We just raised it 28% more over the next 5 years. More than tripled it since 2001. We're talking about capping in-state students. We're already talking about capping out-of-state students. You had about 23% of your undergrads last year at Berkeley that were out-of-state. We love out-of-state. If you're from out-of-state, thank you. You're paying a hell of a lot more money than the rest of us. About 3 times as much, as you know. About $35,000 versus the 12+ thousand. I know that's sticker price. I know none of you paid just 12. I'm not naive. This is a problem because we've gotten out of investing in education, as you know. All those state cuts over the last few decades are now advancing need to find money from someplace else, and that money's now coming right out of your pockets or your parents' pockets. We do a decent job for low-income folks, probably better than any other public university in the country, but it's still not good enough. And those of you, God forbid, are in the middle class, you're getting slammed. Parents are getting slammed. They're making you work that second job. And this is serious, because in a world that's hyper-connected with the merger of IT and globalization, it's a world that probably best described, by the way, is Tom Friedman. You remember Tom Friedman? You've heard of Tom Friedman? Wrote a book, The World is Flat. Some of you read it or heard about it. By the way, that book was written, it was New York Times bestseller list in 2004, which wasn't that long ago. I know it feels for you a long time ago, but it's not that long ago. He made a point the other day to describe this hyper-connected world. It was a book about globalization and technology. And I love the way he described this. So I'll describe it to you. He said, you go back in my book about technology and globalization, and he goes, in the index, look under FFA, FAC. Facebook is not even in there. New York Times best, 4.5 million copies sold, translated into 100+ different languages. Book about technology and globalization. Facebook, at the time, didn't even exist. He said Twitter was still a sound. The cloud was in the sky. 4G was a parking space, LinkedIn a prison. Apps were things you filled out to get into UC Berkeley. Big data was a rap star. And Skype, for most of us, was a typo. None of those things existed, and now they're ubiquitous in our life. His point was we're no longer connected, but hyper-connected, going back to this fundamental thing of the merger of IT and globalization. And why does that matter? Because it connects the dot to this raging debate about what's the future of education. Does it look like this? It looked like this 250 years ago. Didn't have a mic, but there was the sage on the stage, drill and kill, the broadcast model of education, large lecture halls. Pull out your pen, paper, or you're working on your, type it on the iPhone, whatever you may be, and then we're going to teach to the test. Or is it going to be something very, very different? And that's the debate Governor Brown is having with Janet Napolitano. And it's a raging debate, and it's open public. It's exciting. Usually people backstab each other privately. Where do you get it in public? Meanwhile, we're doing things to you, not with you. We scheduled that tuition increase. God, that was beautiful. It was the day after Governor Brown was reelected. I was reelected. We got a call from a Sacramento Bee reporter who had already received the information embargoed and wanted our comments. We said, we're not aware of it. They said, you're not aware of it? It's actually calendared on the next Board of Regents meeting. I said, we're not aware of it. Not only was it calendared, there was barely a discussion. Some of your colleagues showed up and had the audacity to actually want to speak. Remarkably, they wanted to say a few words, and some of them felt that 30 seconds or 60 seconds wasn't long enough. Boy, youth today are tough. And as a consequence, some folks got a little rowdy, felt like they weren't being respected, And we just said, we got this. This is best for you. And we went forward with barely a discussion and raised your tuition because it was calendared, not to discuss, but for an action item, to raise it 5%, 5%, 5%, 5% compounded. That's how we treated you. And you wonder why the last 2 out of 3 regions meetings were shut down by subsequent protests on almost every issue. Let's get back to how we fix that near the end of our conversation as well. Tough time. Prison reform. When Governor Brown was first governor, it was a year that seems like the 18th century to all of you. 1977. When you say 1900, it just seems longer ago, doesn't it? Or yesterday for your teacher. 1977, California had 20,000 prisoners. We peaked at 173,000 prisoners in 2007. Over those 30 years, 1977 at 20,000, to 2007, 173,000. Over those 30 years, we built 22 new prisons. By the way, there's a reason I'm connecting the previous subject. There's a dot to be connected. We built 1 new UC. We crossed a threshold where people were expecting this to happen. Some had said it was happening. When it hadn't happened, we were exaggerating. But we finally started spending more money on incarceration than we were on higher education. Over $10 billion a year, more than the budgets of 12 states, just for incarceration. Mandatory minimum sentences. 5-year mandatory minimum for crack cocaine possession, 5 grams. But you had to have 500 grams of powder cocaine. Remember those? The disparities? All race-based disparities. We did 3 strikes, lock them up. California led the nation in this effort. We got tough on crime. But we started to pay such a price that the courts intervened a few years ago. And they said, hold on, your capacity for the prisons is almost at 200%. About 180%. Some prisons were over 200%, some a little less. And the court said it's not an accommodation problem. You could figure out how people can sleep because they're in every gym and they're double, triple bunk, literally tripled, I saw. Said, but you can't provide their health care. So we're taking over. And the courts mandated that California's prison population had to decrease by a prescribed date. That was under Schwarzenegger and then under Brown. We have failed to meet any of the prescribed requirements. But we have successfully negotiated to extend the terms. And we're now doing something called realignment, realigning our resources and our population into the county jails, getting people out of jails for nonviolent offenses a little sooner than their sentences had been predetermined, and beginning to rationalize this. And I got to say, with some reasonably decent success, but you're just one high-profile mistake away from that all blowing up. And it becomes a Willie Horton. Prop 47, of which I was proud to be the only statewide official to support it, is a big part of the solution. A small part, but a big deal to the lives that will be radically changed because you as voters had the courage to change those lives. It allows us to change some of the sentencing for nonviolent, relatively petty crimes and move away from desire to criminalize them with extended sentences and allowing people the opportunity to get out a little bit earlier. We amended the 3 strikes initiative a couple of years ago. By the way, not one statewide Democrat supported publicly amending the 3 strikes law. That also will help a few thousand people. We tried to repeal the death penalty, something I support, but we fell a little short. Good people can disagree on this, and I respect different points of view on the death penalty. And that goes to the gentleman's question right here. We can't even provide capacity right now. San Quentin, this is the reference. San Quentin is at overcapacity in terms of its death row. So the question is, do we spend hundreds of millions of dollars to make improvements there as opposed to putting those hundreds of millions of dollars back into the UC system or CSU system? By the way, if you want to make community college free in the state of California, The price tag is less than $200 million. Can you imagine doing that? We have a $113 billion general fund budget, $167 billion overall. For $200 million, you can make community college completely free at 112 campuses in every diverse part of the state. Would that go a long way to help address the issue of income inequality? Maybe. Certainly would help advance a college-going culture. So just think about the price of all of these things. The price of detention, the price we put on these initiatives, and the price that comes at a human cost. So the prison issue, we're making some progress. We've got an enormous amount of work to do. And that will segue in a moment to the legalization of marijuana, because it very directly correlates with advancing further reforms in our prison population. $15 is the new stretch goal, isn't it, for minimum wage? Seattle did it first, but there are a lot of exemptions in Seattle. San Francisco followed, Berkeley and others now are moving. And it's the one good thing. For those of you that are cynical, that are sick and tired of politics and politicians and wonder why the heck I was even invited back, I get it. But one thing I now realize and appreciate, that if you don't like the way the world looks when you're standing up, stand on your head and go local. Remarkable things are happening at the local level. I agree. Washington, D.C. is a place where ideas go to die. We see it every day. But states, they call states laboratories of democracy for a reason. But cities, boy, that's laboratories of innovation. And when you feel despair and you feel frustration because people aren't advancing the principles of universal preschool, not advancing the principles of addressing substantive the issue of poverty, ignorance, and disease, think about what Seattle did on their own without permission. They didn't need the state to give permission. They didn't need the federal government. They listened to the debate and they said, you know what, we're sick and tired of a debate around $9 an hour or $10.10 or even $12. We're going to $15. So Michelangelo said the biggest risk in life is not that we aim too high and miss it. The biggest risk in life is that we aim too low and reach it. Think about that in the context of everything you do every day in your life. Think about those words. The idea of a $15 goal, that was a stretch goal, but they achieved it. And you know this, once the mind is stretched, it never goes back to its original form. So now everyone's talking $15. And I think that's a profoundly important thing. And I say that as a guy with 19 small businesses, with over 800 employees in the state, primarily in the restaurant business, that's disproportionately been impacted financially by the increase in minimum wage. But I'm also a guy who subscribes to Henry Ford's point of view, that I want to pay my employees enough so they actually can afford the product. And so one thing I learned as a business person, I haven't created one damn job. Jobs are created by demand. That demand comes from the middle class and our customers. You give me more demand, more customers, give me more money in their pocket, business people like me are going to do just fine. Do not buy the old supply side subscription that it's just wealthy folks with a lot of money that are the job creators. It's a very misleading argument, and I apologize for being a little subjective about it, but this is someone that right out of college, not much older than you, opened my first business, and I recognize that from day one. If no one was walking in, I sure as hell ain't a job creator. It's about demand, it's about customers, and it's about a vibrant middle class. I can't say much about LSD, but my father, if you hear were, he could. I just read an article. My dad is a wonderful guy. He's 81 years old, close friend of Jerry Brown's. He was appointed to the Superior Court in Placer County and then the California Court of Appeals. And someone just did, those fancy Bancroft Library folks. Someone just did one of those big interviews for him. I had never seen this. My staff comes and said, I love your dad. I said, thank you. I said, why? He goes, oh, your dad did LSD. I said, no, what are you saying? That's just, don't insult him. He goes, it's his words. I had no idea. I just learned this 3 weeks ago. That's the best I can say on the topic of LSD. I got no other material for you, brother. I don't know anything about it. But he did it, controlled experiments at Stanford University. They used to pay people. He was paid to do experiments. He remembers. which is impressive that you do remember back in the day. But does go to this issue of the war on drugs. I think the war on drugs is an abject failure. I think it's been a failure since it was launched. Wasted $1 trillion and millions of people's lives have been completely destroyed. But those lives don't look like me. Those are black and brown folks disproportionately. You can line up 100 white people and 100 African Americans, and the reality is they'll use marijuana equally, but the arrest rates don't display that. We saw last year's numbers, 3.7 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana possession if you're an African American than a Caucasian. That's a fact. That's reality. Look in our prison systems. Who's in there for nonviolent drug offense? To me, this is a moral and ethical issue. This is not about potheads and stoners. This is serious stuff. Half of the drug arrests a year and a half ago, we're waiting for the new numbers in the next 6 months. Half of the drug arrests nationwide, were for possession of marijuana. Over 800,000. Just possession of marijuana. When I was mayor, I was doing buy-bus programs. Man, I was participating in the war on drugs. Federal government was handing out all these fancy grants. I was like, what do you need to do? They said nothing. Just send us, put a few bucks up, and we're going to give you hundreds of thousands of dollars. All you have to do, though, is undercover buy-bus. We'd go into the Tenderloin in San Francisco. Police officers loved it because there's a lot of overtime attached to it. I loved it because it didn't cost the general fund much. And neighborhood groups would say, thank God someone's out there to stop all the drug dealing. And we participated in it. We'd line people up. We'd arrest them. We'd book them. They'd go in the county jail. They'd end back up there. We'd go back out again, spend all that money on prosecution, defense, incarceration, destroying lives in the process. I participated in the whole damn thing. And then a few years ago, 3.5 years ago, I said, enough. I can't do this. I can't perpetuate this. I was raging against the race-based disparities on sentencing. I was out there on trying to focus on prison reform, and I wasn't connecting an obvious dot. Oh, I said it was like civil unions, right? I'm for medical marijuana. Remember, that's what all the politicians said about marriage. I'm for civil unions. And then you hopefully go away and you don't ask a follow-up. You say, well, he's not so bad. And that's exactly where most politicians, at least my political stripe, are today. Oh, they're having private conversations, don't worry. That are much different than the public ones. But at least they're having the right private conversations, which means we're getting close. It's part of this 12-step program. I don't know which step that is. So I'm for the taxation, legalization, and regulation for adults of marijuana, and we're going to put an initiative on the ballot for 2016. The challenge is, what does it look like? California ain't Colorado, Washington State, Oregon, Alaska, or even Washington, D.C. It's all of those states combined, and I'm being generous to D.C. calling it a state. They feel good when you say that. We don't import. I mean, sure, a little bit. But we're a net exporter, right? He seems to know more than I do. But this state's got a mature marijuana industry. We're the first state in America to legalize medical marijuana in 1996. Were you alive? Yes, he was. Thank God. But since then, we've seen 4 other states take the lead on legalization. It's time for us to do it, but do it right. Let me give you, for instance. So what I did 2.5 years ago, as I said, you know what, if we're going to do this, I'm not ideological about this. I got 3 kids, a 5-year-old, 3-year-old, and a 1-year-old. I know they're not 15, they're not 13, they're not even 11, but God bless when they are 15, 13, 11. I don't want them smoking pot. But nor do I want drug dealers that don't give a damn how old they are as predators, totally disinterested in what they're selling and have no interest how old they are. I can't support the status quo. For those that are against legalization, what's your solution to the status quo? People are using marijuana today. Kids, in 2 new surveys, we included in a task force report I just put out, 2 new national surveys. Kids said what you all know. For young kids, it's easier to get marijuana than it is to get alcohol. God forbid people say, well, what about DUIs? I say, well, what about DUIs today? If people are smoking marijuana, what are we doing about that today? But the message it sends, All right. We've legalized alcohol. Message that send. Tobacco. It's not a very good message. If any of you smoke, I don't think you feel great about it, right? It's not like people are like, hey, good for you. Look at that. Keep it up. Can I get a little of that? So I think we need to move in a new direction. Here's the challenge. I put out a report with the ACLU last week, and I don't know if you've thought through these things. I haven't thought them through, and I'm responsible as someone now that supports this. I've got to think these through. But what do we do about the existing medical industry? They don't want to be taxed. But if we're going to tax marijuana, are we going to do a Colorado tax of 25%? And if it's 25%, tell me the truth. Are you likely to go, those of you with your medical card, are you likely to go across the street and get it legally? Or continue to address your migraines at the medical club without a tax? Do you get rid of the black market if you tax it too high? Do you get rid of the cartels? Because California, this is cartel central, folks. This is serious stuff. Mexico is trembling about what happens in California. Sure, they're concerned what's happening in those other states. Nothing like the state of California. Where do you tax it? You don't want to start taxing sick people, do you? Because that would be taxing medical. What about advertising? We don't want advertising our kids. We don't want Joe Campbell of Big Tobacco becoming Big Marijuana advertising our kids. What about edibles? You've read a little bit about Colorado, all those little gummy bears, all the M&M versions. I mean, I don't know, jelly beans. Who's regulating that? Who's actually testing that? Is that encouraging youth among our kids? What about brain development, 0 to 14? We know it's not a healthy thing. What about people with schizophrenia and paranoia? Are they actually served by encouraging more legalized marijuana? What about time, manner, and place? Do you want to go to the playground or park? You want to be out there playing soccer, and then someone's like, hey, what's up? Like, dude, no, you can't smoke here. Any more than you want them to smoke cigarette. What about time, manner, and place restrictions? What about DUIs? How do you test something? Alcohol is easy to test. You guys probably know this, but I want to repeat for the few that don't. Alcohol is water soluble. Marijuana is fat soluble. What does that mean? Nothing more than this. Alcohol and its effects are tested in the system, and its effects and the alcohol exit the system. Marijuana and its effects remain in the system, and then the effects go away, but you still are tested for THC. So even though it's not necessarily impairing you, it's in your system a hell of a lot longer. So how do you test for that at a DUI checkpoint? It's tough stuff. What about all the interstate commerce issues? What about banking? We're going to do all Bitcoin? Cryptocurrencies? Can't even find a bank that accepts this. So we want to work through all these issues before 2016, and that's what we're working towards. But mark my word, it will be on the ballot in 2016, and I just think it's time to, as Barack Obama would say, turn the page on our failed war on drugs, address the prison overcrowding, address the cost of criminalization, address the reality that there's never been a society in human history that's been completely drug-free. For as much as we'd like that to be the case, it's never been the case. Let's deal with this from a medical perspective. Let's focus on harm reduction. Let's take the tax revenue, focus on education, prevention for those that are abusing, treatment. Let's focus on educating our kids to a healthier lifestyle. Let's do what we've done to tobacco with marijuana by saying we're not condoning it, but you're an adult. You can do what you want with it. And let's come up with some common sense restrictions on how we advertise it and how we distribute it so it's not on every single street corner and we don't have Starbucks becoming whatever your entrepreneurial. Well, I'm sure some of you will come up with a business. By the way, for those business entrepreneurs out here, I'm just saying. I'm just saying. Just saying. So that brings me back to the conversation that I really wanted to have. And then I want to open it up to follow up on our income inequality questions and some of the others. I want to talk to you about what I think I was asked here to talk about, though you guys gave me the topics. And that's leadership, because I think we're desperate for it. One thing I've learned, that if being in power doesn't mean you have power. Just because you have a title in front of your name doesn't mean a damn thing. And I think about this in the context of history all the time. You think about the most transformative leaders in our lifetime and most transformative leaders in history, folks that you've all studied. Think King, Mandela, Havel, Gandhi. Think about Cesar Chavez. Think about some of the most transformative leaders in our lifetime, in all times. And you think about what they all had in common at the peak of their power. Think about King, seriously, around 1959. Think about Mandela and Havel, 85, 88. Think about Gandhi, and I'm making the number up, but you can Google, I'll be off by a year or two, but 1919, 1921. You can argue around those days, those folks never had more power. But they also had something remarkable in common. All four of those transformative leaders. Jail time. That's just interesting, right? I'm not encouraging that, and please don't write that down. But they had something else in common. None of them had formal authority. None of them were in elected office. Isn't that the old mythology? That, well, I have to be something in life to do something. You know, one day when I'm governor, well, then we're going to make a difference on water. Then we're going to make a difference on income inequality when I'm vice president. That's all the lip service I'll give to that. But in fact, the most extraordinary leaders understood in their core that that wasn't the case. They exercised their moral authority. The more you use your moral authority, the more you get of it. The more you use your formal authority, the less you got. And isn't it fascinating? King, we didn't celebrate. Remember the March on Washington, all those fancy speeches last year? We weren't celebrating former President Martin Luther King. I mean, how many times did Gandhi say, I ain't interested in politics. Thank you once again. Not going to do it. You say, well, hold on, Mandela. Okay. You guys are smart folks. I know it was a new constitution he did. I know there were 2 or 3 big things he did. But tell me something more he did in those 4 short years as president. But I know all of you can tell me about 27 years in prison and what he did to transform not only the people of South Africa, the continent of Africa, but the rest of the world. And then think about Havel. I love Havel. He said, when I became president of Czechoslovakia, he was a guy during my day that was transformative because he literally was a contemporary at the time. The old Soviet Union, Czechoslovakia, the Velvet Revolution. He had written a wonderful play called The Power of the Powerless. That should say something. And he talked about how governing degeniused him. He talked about the constraints of office. And he looked forward to the day he was no longer president of Czechoslovakia because he can once again exercise his moral authority. I say that in terms of what it's all about, life. Because I sure as hell hope you're here, not in this class, but here at UC Berkeley, because you want to have purpose and meaning in life. Or at least someone else wanted it for you. But you can choose your path. You can be a bystander in this life. You can. But why the hell do that? Seriously. Someone told me this the other day when I was complaining. Man, I was complaining. I'm overscheduled. This is ridiculous. Nothing ever changes. No one's listening to me. It's a joke. I'm getting time for myself. They said, well, life can either happen to you or life can happen for you. And I was like, damn, that's pretty good. Right? Life can either happen to you or life can happen for you. You could be a bystander. You can just sit back and wait for someone else. or wait to be something to do something. Or you can step up and step in. You can take responsibility. You can take accountability. And you can exercise your moral authority, because all of you have it. Every single one of you have something no one else has. It's just a damn fact. Your story is unique. Your experiences are completely unique. You've lived a world with a completely different set of eyes than the person sitting behind you, in front of you, or next to you. Your expression is unique. So I hope, if anything Berkeley has taught you, is what Lincoln warned against. Lincoln said, we are all born originals, but sadly, too many of us die copies. His point was Havel's point. He said, life de-geniuses you. We're all born originals, but too many of us die copies. My admonition to you is the point I'm making. Learn from, don't follow others. Your expression is unique. No one else has it. I'm an employer. With all due respect to your education, I don't care how much you know. If you ever ask me your job, I don't care. Google knows more. If you don't believe it, let's look it up. I care what you're going to do. And you know what I care about? I care about your unique expression. I'm looking for something different. In a world where the world is being customized around you, man, you were all conditioned by Amazon. You all been conditioned by Amazon. My day was one to many, the old industrial economy, one size fits all, selling down a vision, lecture halls, sage on the stage, broadcast. You vote, I decide. But I ain't going to play with you anymore. You want things customized, individualized. Your expression is unique. No one else has it. Learn from, don't follow others. Maintain that unique expression. Share your passions, as Oliver Wendell Holmes says, with action, at peril of being judged not to have lived. Don't be a bystander in life. I don't know if that's activism or that's just breathing. What's the damn purpose? Every issue you guys brought up requires your voice. It requires you to exercise a sense of responsibility. I love this. There is a billboard down around the 405 freeway in L.A. Who's from L.A.? Damn. Couldn't get into UCLA, huh? Eat your heart out, UCLA. They're here. There's a billboard on the 405. Everyone from L.A. will know what I mean. There's a big billboard that says you're not stuck in traffic. Right? Please. Big billboard, not stuck in traffic. And then on the 405, you work your way up. About 45 minutes later, you move up 100 yards. You finally get closer, and you look up at that big billboard, and you realize there's something underneath it in parentheses. It says, you're not stuck in traffic on top, and in parentheses says, you are traffic. Think about that. Right? Society becomes how we behave. We are our behaviors. We are growing income inequality. We are an overcrowded prison population. We are a water crisis. Think about that next time you're In-N-Out Burger. We are our behaviors. Let me close with this because I have no time and you got to get the hell out of here. Because I think this sums up my subjectivity as well, or better than anything. In 2004, a friend of mine told me this, Sir Ken Robinson, amazing guy, told me this story. Amazing story. 10 years ago, 2004, in Death Valley, the hottest and driest place on earth, one of them. 7 inches of rain fell almost overnight. It was amazing. But what was more extraordinary, in the spring of 2005, literally almost to the day, 10 years ago, something remarkable happened that no one had ever seen before. The entire valley was carpeted with wildflowers. Turns out, Ken said, Death Valley wasn't dead after all. It was dormant. He said the seeds of possibility were planted years and years before, waiting for the right conditions to come along. When the right conditions come along, he said, success becomes irresistible. Think about that. I love that. What he was saying is what you should consider was the definition of leadership. Leadership's not command and control. Activism is not command and control. It's not selling down your vision. It's climate control. Successful activism, successful leadership is about creating the right conditions where success becomes irresistible. Think about that in the context of your own activism. Think about that in the context of the own work you're doing day in and day out. And think about the fact that all of you have remarkable talents that are beyond your wildest ability to imagine, but only if you have the courage to fail and the courage to share your voice with others. Thank you all very, very much.